Ahoy again, it's me, Ron Gabaldon, an audiobook narrator, sort of. I guess. Pretty much. Welcome to Part 7 of Hocus Pocus by Kurt Vonnegut, the finale of this series. By now, you've experienced in full the events of the prison break from Athena Prison across the lake from Scipio. You've learned a little more about the elders of Tralfamadore, the protocols of the elders of Tralfamadore. You've met Muriel Peck, who becomes Eugene Debs Hartke's lover post-firing from Tarkington College, and how the violence and chaos of the prison break unfolded, and the tragedy that took over the town from that event. So, with that, here comes Part 7, which is the last part of it. You know that he had a brief. You know that Eugene Debs Hartke had a brief affair in Manila, in the Philippines, after the Vietnam War, with a war correspondent from the Des Moines Register, my hometown, Des Moines, Iowa. In which he spawned a son. And will we get to meet him? Probably. Will it be a fulfilling experience? Well, that's for you to decide. So enjoy Part 7 here of Hocus Pocus. And thanks again, everyone, for sticking with me through this entire book. It's a longer one, but I hope you really enjoyed it. It has a lot to say about the times that we're experiencing right now. And as another reminder, I do have books that are available on Audible. Daffodil by Truant D. Memphis. Death Gets a Book by Frank J. Edler. Catcoin, A Fictional History of Cryptocurrency, A Death in Toledo, also by Frank J. Edler. I get a little bit of royalties from these books for each sale. So every time you use a credit or something, I might get $1.50 or something out of it. I don't know. I've never really done the math. So, but if you really wanted to support me and you like this channel, let other people know. Leave a review of any of these books. If you end up spending a credit or purchasing any of these books on Audible, leave a review. Leave a review. Tell someone else if they're suggesting. I see on the subreddit, like the Vonnegut subreddit or on the audiobook subreddits, people asking for recommendations for books all the time. So, throw them, hey, there's this guy who does these audiobooks and list them out for them, and maybe I'll make a couple bucks. All right? Thanks a lot, everybody, and good luck out there. Hocus Pocus by Kurt Vonnegut, Part 7, Chapters 38 through 40, read by Ron Gabaldon. 38. Yes, and now the Japanese are pulling out. Their army of occupation in business suits is going home. The prison break at Athena was the straw that broke the camel's back, I think, but they were already abandoning properties, simply walking away from them before the expensive catastrophe. Why they ever wanted to own a country in such an advanced state of physical and spiritual and intellectual dilapidation is a mystery. Maybe they thought that would be a good way to get revenge for our having dropped not one, but 2 atomic bombs on them. So that makes 2 groups so far who have given up on owning this country of their own free will. Mainly, I think, because so many unhappy and increasingly lawless people of all races who don't own anything turn out to come along with the properties. It looks like they will keep Oahu as a sort of memento of their empire's high watermark, just as the British have kept Bermuda. Speaking of unhappy people of all races, I have often wondered how the Tarkington Board of Trustees would have been treated if Athena had been a white prison instead of a black one. I think Hispanic convicts would have regarded them as the blacks did, as aardvarks, as exotic creatures who had nothing to do with life as they had experienced it. It seems to me that white convicts, though, might have wanted to kill them, or at least beat them up, for not caring what became of them any more than they cared what became of blacks and Hispanics. Dr. Dole went back to Berlin. At least that's where she said she was going. I asked her where she had hidden during the siege. She said she crawled into the firebox under an old boiler in the basement of this library. It hadn't been used since before I taught here, but it would have cost a lot of money to move. The school hated to spend money on improvements that didn't show. So, during the siege, she was only a few meters away from me while I sat up here and engaged in the wonderful new science of futurology. Dr. Dole sure didn't think much of her own country. She ranted on about its sky-high rates of murder and suicide and drug addiction and infant mortality, its low rate of literacy, the fact that it had a higher percentage of its citizens in prison than any other country except for Haiti and South Africa, and didn't know how to manufacture anything anymore, and put less money into research and primary education than Japan or Korea, or any country in East or West Europe, and on and on. At least we still have freedom of speech, I said. And she said, "That isn't something somebody else gives you. That's something you have to give yourself." Before I forget, during her job interview, she asked Jason Wilder where he had gone to college. He said, "Yale." "You know what they ought to call that place?" she said. "No," he said. And she said, "Plantation Owners Tech." When she was living in Berlin, she told me, she had been appalled by how ignorant so many American tourists and soldiers were of geography and history, and the languages and customs of other countries. She asked me, "What makes so many Americans proud of their ignorance? They act as though their ignorance somehow made them charming." I had been asked the same general question by Alton Darwin when I was working at Athena. A World War II movie was being shown all over the TVs over there. Frank Sinatra had been captured by the Germans, and he was being interrogated by an SS major who spoke English at least as well as Sinatra, and who played the cello and painted watercolors in his spare time, and who told Sinatra how much he looked forward to getting back, when the war was over, to his first love, which was lepidopterology. Sinatra didn't know what lepidopterology was. It is the study of moths and butterflies. That had to be explained to him. And Alton Darwin asked me, "How come in all these movies the Germans and the Japanese are always the smart ones, and the Americans are the dumb ones, and still the Americans win the war?" Darwin didn't feel personally involved. The American combat soldiers in the movie were all white. That wasn't just white propaganda. That happened to be historically accurate. During the finale rack, American military units were segregated according to race. The feeling back then was that whites would feel like garbage if they had to share quarters and dining facilities and so on with blacks. That went for civilian life, too. The black people had their own schools, and they were excluded from most hotels and restaurants and places of entertainment, except on stage, and polling booths. They were also strung up or burned alive or whatever from time to time as reminders that their place was at the very bottom of society. They were thought, when they were given soldier suits, to be lacking in determination and initiative in battle, so they were employed mostly as common laborers or truck drivers behind the Duke Waynes and Frank Sinatras, who did the fearless stuff. There was one all-black fighter squadron. To the surprise of many, it did quite well. See the nigger fly the airplane? To get back to Alton Darwin's question about why Frank Sinatra deserved to win even though he didn't know anything, I said, I think he deserves to win because he is like Davy Crockett at the Alamo. The Walt Disney movie about Davy Crockett had been shown over and over again at the prison, so all the convicts knew who Davy Crockett was. And one thing it might be good to bring out at my trial is that I never told the convicts the Mexican general who besieged the Alamo was trying and failing to do what Abraham Lincoln would later do successfully, which was to hold his country together and outlaw slavery. How is Sinatra like Davy Crockett? Alton Darwin asked me. And I said, his heart is pure. Yes, and there is more of my story to tell. But I have just received a piece of news from my lawyer that has knocked the wind out of me. After Vietnam, I thought there was nothing that could ever hit me that hard again. I thought I was used to dead bodies, no matter whose. Wrong again. Ah me. If I tell now who it is that died, and how that person died only yesterday, that will seem to complete my story. From a reader's point of view, there would be nothing more to say but this. The end. But there is more I want to tell, so I will carry on as though I hadn't heard the news, albeit doggedly, and I write this. The lieutenant colonel who led the assault on Scipio and then kept locals off the helicopters was also a graduate of the academy, but maybe 27 years younger than myself. When I told him my name and he saw my class ring, he realized who I was and what I used to be. He exclaimed, "My Lord, it's the preacher!" If it hadn't been for him, I don't know what would have become of me. I guess I would have done what most of the other Valley people did, which was go to Rochester or Buffalo or beyond, looking for any kind of work, minimum wage for sure. The whole area south of the Meadowdale Cinema Complex was and still is under martial law. His name was Harley Wheelock III. He told me he and his wife were infertile, so they adopted twin girls from Peru, South America, not Peru, Indiana. They were cute little Inca girls, but he hardly ever got home anymore. His division was so busy. He was all set to go home on leave from the South Bronx when he was ordered here to put down the prison break and rescue the hostages. His father, Harvey Wheelock II, was 3 years ahead of me at the academy and died, I already knew, in some kind of accident in Germany, and so never served in Vietnam. I asked Harley III how exactly Harley II had died. He told me his father drowned while trying to rescue a Swedish woman who committed suicide by opening the windows of her Volvo and driving it off a dock into the Ruhr River at Essen, home, as it happens, to that premier manufacturer of crematoria, A.J. Topf und Sohn. Small world. Now, Harley III said to me, "You know anything about this excrement hole?" Of course, he himself didn't say excrement. He had never heard of the Mohiga Valley before he was ordered here. Like most people, he had heard of Athena and Tarkington, but had no clear idea where they were. I replied that the excrement hole was home to me, although I had been born in Delaware and raised in Ohio, and that I expected one day to be buried here. "Where's the mayor?" he said. "Dead," I said, "and all the policemen, too, including the campus cops and the fire chief." "So there isn't any government?" he said. "I'd say you're the government," I said. He used the name of our Savior as an explosive expletive and then added, "Wherever I go, all of a sudden I am the government. I'm already the government in the South Bronx, and I've got to get back there as quick as I can. So I hereby declare you the mayor of this excrement hole." This time he actually said excrement hole, echoing me. "Go down to City Hall, wherever that is, and start governing." He was so decisive. He was so loud. As though the conversation weren't weird enough, he was wearing one of those coal scuttle helmets the Army started issuing after we lost the Vietnam War, maybe to change our luck. Make blacks, Jews, and everybody else look like Nazis, and see how that worked out. "I can't govern," I protested. "Nobody would pay any attention to me. I would be a joke." "Good point," he said. So loud. He got the governor's office in Albany on the radio. The governor himself was on his way to Rochester by helicopter in order to go on TV with the freed hostages. The governor's office managed to patch through Harley III's call to the governor up in the sky. Harley III told the governor who I was and what the situation was in Scipio. It didn't take long. And then Harley III turned to me and said, "Congratulations, you are now a Brigadier General in the National Guard." "I've got a family on the other side of the lake," I said. "I've got to go find out how they are." He was able to tell me how they were. He personally, the day before, had seen Margaret and Mildred loaded into the steel box on the back of a prison van, consigned to the Laughing Academy at Batavia. "They're fine," he said. "Your country needs you more than they do now, so General Hartke, strut your stuff." He was so full of energy. It was almost as though his coal scuttle helmet contained a thunderstorm. Never an idle moment. No sooner had he persuaded the governor to make me a brigadier than he was off to the stable where captured freedom fighters were being forced to dig graves for all the bodies. The weary diggers had every reason to believe that they were digging their own graves. They had seen plenty of movies about the finale rack, in which soldiers in coal scuttle helmets stood around while people in rags dug their own final resting places. I heard Harley III barking orders at the diggers, telling them to dig deeper and make the sides straighter and so on. I had seen leadership of such a high order exercised in Vietnam, and I myself had exhibited it from time to time, so I am quite certain that Harley III had taken some sort of amphetamine. There wasn't much for me to govern at first. This place, which had been the sole remaining business of any size in the valley, stood vacant and seemed likely to remain so. Most locals had managed to run away after the prison break. When they came back, though, there was no way to make a living. Those who owned houses or places of business couldn't find anybody to sell them to. They were wiped out. So most of the civilians I might have governed had soon packed the best of their belongings into cars and trailers and paid small fortunes to black marketeers for enough gasoline to get them the heck out of here. I had no troops of my own. Those on my side of the lake were on loan from the commander of the National Guard Division, the 42nd Division, the Rainbow Division, Lucas Florio. He had his headquarters in Hiroshi Matsumoto's old office at the prison. He wasn't a graduate of West Point, and he was too young to have fought in Vietnam, and his home was in Schenectady, so we never met before. His troops were all white, with Orientals classified as honorary white people. The same was true of the 82nd Airborne. There were also black and Hispanic units somewhere. The theory being, as with the prisons, that people were always more comfortable with those of their own race. This resegregation, although I never heard any public figure say so, also made the armed forces more like a set of golf clubs. You could use this battalion or that one, depending on what color people they were supposed to fight. The Soviet Union, of course, with citizenry, including every sort of human being but a black or Hispanic, found out the hard way that soldiers wouldn't fight hard at all against people who looked and thought and talked like them. The Rainbow Division itself began during World War I as an experiment integrating unlike Americans who weren't Army regulars. Reserve divisions activated back then were all identified with specific parts of the country. Then somebody got the idea of putting together a division composed of draftees and volunteers from all different parts of the country to prove how well they could get along. Harmony between white people thought not to like each other very much was what the rainbow represented then. The Rainbow Division did in fact fight about as well as any other one during the War to End Wars, the prelude to the finale rack. Afterward, the experiment complete, the 42nd Division became merely one more National Guard outfit, arbitrarily handed over with its battle ribbons to New York State. But the symbol of the rainbow lives on in its shoulder patch. Before I was arrested for insurrection, I myself was a wearer of that rainbow, along with the star of a brigadier. 39. During my first 2 weeks as military commander of the Scipio district, all the way to the head of the lake and all the way down to the National Forest, the best thing I did, I think, was to make some of the soldiers firemen. A few had been firemen in civilian life, so I got them to familiarize themselves with the town's firefighting apparatus, which hadn't been hurt during the siege. One real stroke of luck, the fire trucks all had full tanks of gasoline. You would have thought, in a society where everybody from top to bottom was stealing everything that wasn't nailed down, that somebody would have siphoned off all that priceless gasoline. Every so often, in the midst of chaos, you come across an amazing, inexplicable instance of civic responsibility. Maybe the last shred of faith people have is in their firemen. I have also supervised the exhumation of the bodies next to the stable. They had been buried for only a few days, but then the government, personified by a coroner and the medical examiner from the state police, who knew so much about crucifixions, ordered us to dig them up again. The government had to fingerprint and photograph them, and describe their dental work, if any, and their obvious wounds, if any, and so on. We didn't have to dig up the Schultzes again, who had already been dug up once to make room for the pavilion. And we hadn't found the young woman's skull yet. The digging hadn't gone deep enough yet to find out what had become of the head of the missing Lilac Queen. The government, just those 2 guys from out of town, said we had to bury the bodies much deeper when they were through with them. That was the law. We wouldn't want to break the law, I said. The coroner was black. I wouldn't have known he was black if he hadn't told me. I asked him if he couldn't arrange for the county or the state or somebody to take possession of the bodies until the next of kin, if any, could decide what was to be done with them. I hoped they would be taken to Rochester, where they could be embalmed or refrigerated or cremated, or at least buried in decent containers of some kind. They had been buried here in nothing but their clothing. He said he would look into it, but that I shouldn't get my hopes up. He said the county was broke, and the state was broke, and the country was broke, and that he was broke. He had lost what little he had in microsecond arbitrage. After the government left, I faced the problem of what the best way would be to dig much deeper graves. I was reluctant to ask National Guardsmen to do it with shovels. They had been resentful when I had them dig up the bodies and were growing more sullen in any case, as it became more and more apparent, even that early in the game, that they might never be allowed to return to civilian life. The glamour of their combat infantry badges was wearing thin. I couldn't use convict labor from across the lake. That, too, was the law. And then I remembered that the college had a backhoe which ran on diesel fuel, which wasn't a hot item on the black market. So if somebody could find the backhoe, there might still be some fuel in its tank. A soldier found it, and the tank was full. Miracle! Again, I asked the question, how much longer can I go on being an atheist? The tank was full because there was only one diesel automobile in Scipio when the diaspora began. It was a Cadillac General Motors put on the market about the time we got kicked out of Vietnam. It is still here. It was such a lemon that you might as well have tried to go on a Sunday spin in an Egyptian pyramid. It used to belong to a Tarkington parent. He was coming to his daughter's graduation when it broke down in front of the Black Cat Cafe. It had already stopped of its own accord many times between here and New York City. So he went to the hardware store and bought yellow paint and a brush and painted big lemons all over it and sold it to Lyle Hooper for $1. This was a man who was on the board of directors of General Motors. During the brief time the bodies were all above ground again, a person showed up with a Toyota hearse and an undertaker from Rochester to claim one. That was Charlton Hooper, who had been invited to try out for the New York Knickerbockers basketball team, but had chosen to become a physicist instead. As I've said, he was 2 meters tall. That's tall. I asked the undertaker where he had found the gasoline for the trip. He wouldn't tell me at first, but I kept after him. He finally said, "Try the crematorium in the back of the Meadowdale Cinema Complex. Ask for Guido." I asked Charlton if he had come all the way from Waxahachie, Texas. The last I'd heard, he was running experiments with the enormous atom smasher, the super collider down there. He said the funds for the super collider had dried up, so he had moved to Geneva, New York, not that far away. He was teaching freshman physics at Hobart College. I asked him if there was any way the super collider could be turned into a prison. He said he guessed they could put a bunch of bad guys in there and throw the switch and make their hair stand on end and raise their temperatures a couple of degrees centigrade. About a week after Charlton took his father's body away, and we reburied all the others to a legal depth with the backhoe, I was awakened one afternoon by a terrible uproar in what had been such a peaceful town. I was living down in the town hall back then, and often took naps in the afternoon. The noise was coming from up here. Chainsaws were snarling. There was hammering. It sounded like an army. As far as I knew, there were supposed to be only 4 guardsmen up here, keeping a fire watch. The soldier who was stationed in my reception room to wake me up in case there was something important for me to do had vanished. He had gone up the hill to discover what on earth was happening. There had been no warning of any special activity. So I trudged up Clinton Street all alone. I was wearing civilian shoes and a camouflage suit General Florio had given me, along with one of his own stars on each shoulder. That was all I had for a uniform. When I got to the top of Clinton Street, I found General Florio directing soldiers brought over from his side of the lake. They were turning the quadrangle into a city of tents. Others constructed a barbed wire fence around it. I did not have to ask the meaning of all this. It was obvious that Tarkington College, which had stayed small as the prison across the lake had grown and grown, was itself a prison now. General Florio turned to me and smiled. "Hello, Warden Hartkey," he said. Once all those 10-man tents, which were brought down from the armory across the highway from the Meadowdale Cinema Complex, were set up on the quadrangle as though on a checkerboard. It seemed so logical. The surrounding buildings, Somoza Hall, this library, the bookstore, the pavilion, and so on, with machine gunners at various windows and doorways, and with barbed wire between them and the tents, served well enough as prison walls. General Florio said to me, "Company's coming." I remember a lecture Damon Stern gave about his visit with several Tarkington students to Auschwitz, the infamous Nazi extermination camp in Poland during the finale rack. Stern used to make extra money taking trips to Europe with students whose parents or guardians didn't want to see them over Christmas or during the summertime. He caught a lot of heck for taking some to Auschwitz. He did it impulsively and without asking permission from anyone. It wasn't on the schedule, and some of the students were very upset afterward. He said in his lecture that if the fences and gallows and gas chambers were removed from the tidy checkerboard of streets and old stucco two-story shotgun buildings, it might have made a nice enough junior college for low-income or underachieving people in the area. The buildings had been put up years before World War I, he said, as a comfortable outpost for soldiers of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Among the many titles of that emperor, he said, was Duke of Auschwitz. What General Florio was after on our side of the lake was our sanitary facilities. The prisoners were to use buckets in their tents for toilets, but then these could be emptied into toilets in the surrounding buildings and flushed from there into Scipio's state-of-the-art sewage disposal plant. Across the lake, they were having to bury everything. And no showers. We had plenty of showers. One touching rather than horrible thing about the siege, surely, was how little damage the escaped convicts did to this campus. It was as though they really believed that it was going to be theirs for generations. This brings to mind another of Damon Stern's lectures, which was about how the brutalized and starving poor people of Petrograd in Russia behaved after they broke into the palace of the Tsars in 1917. They got to see for the first time all the treasures inside the palace, and they were so outraged they wanted to wreck them. But then, one man got their attention by firing a gun at the ceiling, and he said, "Comrades, comrades, this is all ours now. Don't hurt anything." They renamed Petrograd Leningrad. Now, it's Petrograd again. In a way, the escaped convicts were like a neutron bomb. They had no compassion for living things, but they did surprisingly little damage to property. Damon Stern, the unicyclist, on the other hand, laid down his life for living things. They weren't even human beings. They were horses. They weren't even his horses. His wife and kids got away, and, last I heard, were living in Lackawanna, where they had relatives. That's nice when people have relatives they can run away to. But Damon Stern is buried deep and close to where he fell, next to the stable, in the shadow of Musket Mountain when the sun goes down. His wife Wanda June came back here after the siege in a pickup truck she said belonged to her half-brother. She paid a fortune for enough gas to get here from Lackawanna. I asked her what she was doing for money, and she said she and Damon had put away a lot of yen in their freezer in a box marked Brussels sprouts. Damon woke her up in the middle of the night and told her to get into the Volkswagen with the kids and take off for Rochester with the headlights off. He had heard the explosion across the lake and seen the silent army crossing the ice to Scipio. The last thing he ever did with Wanda June was hand her the box marked Brussels sprouts. Damon himself, over his wife's objections, stayed behind to spread the alarm. He said he would be along later by hitching a ride in somebody else's car, or by walking all the way to Rochester on back roads he knew, if he had to. It isn't clear what happened after that. He probably called the local police, although none of them lived to say so. He woke up a lot of people in the immediate neighborhood. The best conjecture is that he heard gunfire inside the stable and unwisely went to investigate. A freedom fighter with an AK-47 was gut-shooting horses for the fun of it. He didn't shoot them in the head. Damon must have asked him to stop, so the freedom fighter shot him too. His wife didn't want his body. She said the happiest years of his life had been spent here, so he should stay buried here. She found all 4 of the family's unicycles. That was easy. The soldiers were taking turns trying to ride them. Before that, several of the convicts had also tried to ride them, so far as I know, with no success. So I went back down to Clinton Street to the town hall to ponder this latest change in my career, that I was next to be a warden. There was a Rolls-Royce Corniche, a convertible coupe, parked out front. Whoever had a car like that had enough yen or marks or some other stable currency to buy himself or herself enough black market gas for a trip from anywhere to anywhere. My guess was that it was the chariot of some Tarkington student or parent who hoped to recover property left in a dorm suite at the start of the vacation period, a vacation which now, obviously, might never end. The soldier, who was supposed to be my receptionist, was back on duty. He had returned to his post after General Florio told him to stop standing around with his thumb in his anus and start stringing barbed wire or erecting tents. He was waiting for me at the front door, and he told me I had a visitor. So I asked him, "Who is the visitor?" He said, "It's your son, sir." I was thunderstruck. "Eugene is here?" I said. Eugene Jr. had told me that he never wanted to see me again as long as he lived. How is that for a life sentence? And he was driving a Rolls-Royce now? Eugene? "No, sir," he said. "Not Eugene." "Eugene is the only son I have," I said. "What did he say his name was?" "He told me, sir," he said, "that he was your son Rob Roy." That was all the proof I needed that a son of mine did indeed await me in my office. That name, Rob Roy. Rob and Roy and I was back in the Philippine Islands again, having just been kicked out of Vietnam. I was back in bed with a voluptuous female war correspondent from the Des Moines Register, whose lips were like sofa pillows, telling her that if I had been a fighter plane, I would have had little pictures of people painted all over me. I calculated how old he was. He was 23, making him the youngest of my children. He was the baby of the family. He was in the reception room outside my office. He stood up when I came in. He was exactly as tall as myself. His hair was the same color and texture as mine. He needed a shave, and his potential beard was as black and thick as mine. His eyes were the same color as mine. All 4 of our eyes were greenish amber. We had the same big nose, my father's nose. He was nervous and polite. He was expensively dressed in leisure clothes. If he had been learning disabled or merely stupid, which he wasn't, he might have had a happy 4 years at Tarkington, especially with that car of his. I was giddy. I had taken off my overcoat on the way in, so that he could see my general's stars. That was something anyway. How many boys had a father who was a general? "How can I help you?" I said. I hardly know where to begin, he said. I think you've already begun by telling the guard that you were a son of mine, I said. Was that a joke? Do you think it was a joke? He asked. I don't pretend I was a saint when I was young and away from home so much, I said, but I never made love using an alias. I was always easy to find afterward if somebody wanted to find me badly enough. So if I did father a child out of wedlock somewhere along the line, that comes as a complete surprise to me. I would have thought the mother, the minute she found out she was pregnant, would have gotten in touch with me. I know one mother who didn't, he said. Before I could reply, he blurted words he must have rehearsed en route. This is going to be a very brief visit, he said. I'm going to be in and out of here before you know it. I'm on my way to Italy, and I never want to see this country ever again, and especially Dubuque. It would turn out that he had been through an ordeal that lasted much, much longer than the siege of Scipio, and was probably harder on him than Vietnam had been on me. He had been tried for child molestation in Dubuque, Iowa, where he had founded and run a free child care center at his own expense. He wasn't married, a strike against him in the eyes of most juries, a character flaw like having served in the Vietnam War. I grew up in Dubuque, he would tell me, and the money I inherited was made in Dubuque. It was a meatpacking fortune. I wanted to give something back to Dubuque. With so many single parents raising children on minimum wage, and with so many married couples both working to make enough to feed and clothe their children halfway decently, I thought what Dubuque needed most was a child care center that was nice and didn't cost anything. 2 weeks after he opened the center, he was arrested for child molestation because several of the children came home with inflamed genitalia. He was later to prove in court, after smears were taken from the children's lesions, that a fungus was to blame. The fungus was closely related to jock itch, and may actually have been a new strain of jock itch, which had learned how to rise above all the standard remedies for that affliction. By then, though, he had been held in jail without bail for 3 months, and had to be protected from a lynch mob by the National Guard. Luckily for him, Dubuque, like so many communities, had backed up its police with armor and infantry. After he was acquitted, he had to be transported out of town and deep into Illinois in a buttoned-up tank, or somebody would have killed him. The judge who acquitted him was killed. He was of Italian ancestry. Someone sent him a pipe bomb concealed in a huge salami. But that son of mine did not tell me about any of that until just before he said, "It's time to say goodbye." He prefaced the tale of how he had suffered so with these words, "I hope you understand the last thing I wanted to do was make any demands on your emotions." "Try me," I said. Thinking about our meeting now fills me with a sort of sweetness. He had liked me enough, found me warm enough, to use me as though I were a really good father, if only for a little while. In the beginning, when we were feeling each other out very gingerly, and I hadn't yet admitted that he was my son, I asked him if Rob Roy was the name on his birth certificate, or whether that was a nickname his mother had hung on him. He said it was the name on his birth certificate. "And the father on the birth certificate?" I asked. "It was the name of a soldier who died in Vietnam," he said. "Do you remember what it was?" I said. Here came a surprise. It was the name of my brother-in-law, Jack Patton, whom his mother had never met, I'm sure. I must have told her about Jack in Manila, and she'd remembered his name, and that he was unmarried and had died for his country. I thought to myself, good old Jack, wherever you are, it's time to laugh like hell again. "So what makes you think I'm your father instead of him?" I said. "Your mother finally told you?" "She wrote me a letter," he said. "She didn't tell you face to face?" I said. "She couldn't," he said. "She died of cancer of the pancreas when I was 4 years old." That was a shock. She sure hadn't lasted long after I made love to her. I've always enjoyed thinking of the women I have made love to as living on and on. I had imagined his mother, game and smart and sporty and funny, with lips like sofa pillows, living on and on. "She wrote me a letter on her deathbed," he continued, "which was put into the hands of a law firm in Dubuque, not to be opened until after the death of the good man who had married her and adopted me. He died only a year ago." "Did the letter say why you were named Rob Roy?" I inquired. "No," he said. "I assumed it must be because she liked the novel by that name by Sir Walter Scott." "That sounds right," I said. What good would it do him or anybody else to know that he was named for 2 shots of scotch, 1 shot of sweet vermouth, cracked ice, and a twist of lemon peel? "How did you find me?" I said. "At first I didn't think I wanted to find you," he said. "But then 2 weeks ago I thought that we were entitled to see each other once, at least. So I called West Point." "I haven't had any contact with them for years," I said. "That's what they told me," he said. "But just before I called, they got a call from the governor of New York who said he had just made you a Brigadier General. He wanted to make sure he hadn't been made a fool of. He wanted to make sure you were what you claimed to be." "Well," I said, and we were still standing in the reception room, "I don't think we need to wait for blood tests to find out whether you are really my son or not. You are the spit and image of me when I was your age." "You should know that I really loved your mother," I went on. "That was in her letter, how much in love you were," he said. "You will have to take my word for it," I said, "that if I had known she was pregnant, I would have behaved honorably. I'm not quite sure what we would have done. We would have worked something out." I led the way into my office. "Come on in. There are a couple of easy chairs in here. We can close the door." No, he said. "I'm on my way. I just thought we should see each other just one time. We've done that now. It's no big thing." "I like life to be simple," I said. "But if you went away without another word, that would be much too simple for me, and for you too, I hope." So I got him into my office and closed the door, and got us settled in facing easy chairs. We hadn't touched. We never would touch. "I would offer you coffee," I said, "but nobody in this valley has coffee." "I've got some in my car," he said. "I'm sure," I said, "but don't go get it. Never mind. I cleared my throat. "If you'll pardon my saying so, you seem to be what I have heard called fabulously well-to-do." He said that yes, he was fortunate financially. The Dubuque meat packer who married his mother and adopted him had sold his business to the Shah of Bratpur shortly before he died, and had been paid in gold bricks deposited in a bank in Switzerland. The meat packer's name was Lowell Fenstermaker, so my son's full name was Rob Roy Fenstermaker. Rob Roy said he certainly wasn't going to change his last name to Hartke, that he felt like Fenstermaker and not Hartke. His stepfather had been very good to him. Rob Roy said that the only thing he didn't like about him was the way he raised calves for veal. The baby animals, scarcely out of the womb, were put in cages so cramped that they could hardly move, to make their muscles nice and tender. When they were big enough, their throats were cut, and they had never run or jumped or made friends or done anything that might have made life a worthwhile experience. What was their crime? Rob Roy said that his inherited wealth was at first an embarrassment. He said that until very recently, he never would have considered buying a car like the one parked outside, or wearing a cashmere jacket and lizard skin shoes made in Italy. That was what he was wearing in my office. When nobody else in Dubuque could afford black market coffee and gasoline, I too did without. I used to walk everywhere. What happened very recently? I said. I was arrested for molesting little children, he said. I itched all over with a sudden attack of psychosomatic hives. He told me the whole story. I said to him, I thank you for sharing that with me. The hives went away as quickly as they had come. I felt wonderful, very happy to have him look me over and think what he would. I had seldom been happy to have my legitimate children look me over and think what they would. What made the difference? I hate to say so, because my answer is so paltry, but here it is. I had always wanted to be a general, and there I was, wearing general's stars. How embarrassing to be human. There was this, too. I was no longer encumbered by my wife and mother-in-law. Why did I keep them at home so long, even though it was plain that they were making the lives of my children unbearable? It could be, I suppose, because somewhere in the back of my mind, I believed that there might really be a big book in which all things were written, and that I wanted some impressive proof that I could be compassionate recorded there. I asked Rob Roy where he had gone to college. Yale, he said. I told him what Helen Dole said about Yale, that it ought to be called Plantation Owners Tech. I don't get it, he said. I had to ask her to explain it myself, I said. She said Yale was where plantation owners learned how to get the natives to kill each other instead of them. That's a bit strong, he said. And then he asked me if my first wife was still alive. I've only had one, I said. She's still alive. There was a lot about her in Mother's letter, he said. Really? I said. Like what? About how she was hit by a car the day you were going to take her to the senior prom. About how she was paralyzed from the waist down, but you still married her, even though she would have to spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. If that was in the letter, I must have told his mother that. And your father, is he still alive? He said. No, I said. The ceiling of a gift shop fell on him at Niagara Falls. Did he ever regain his eyesight? He said. Regain his what? I said. And then I realized that his question was based on some other lie I had told his mother. His eyesight, he said. No, I said. Never did. I think that's so beautiful, he said. How he came home from the war blind and you used to read Shakespeare to him? He sure loved Shakespeare, I said. So, he said, I am descended not just from one war hero, but two. War hero, I said. I know you would never call yourself that, he said, but that's what Mother said you were. And you can certainly call your father that. How many Americans shot down 28 German planes in World War II? We could go to the library and look it up, I said. They have a very good library here. You can find out anything if you really try. Where is my Uncle Bob buried? He said. Your what? I said. Your brother Bob, my Uncle Bob, he said. I had never had a brother of any kind. I took a wild guess. We threw his ashes out of an airplane, I said. You certainly had some bad luck, he said. Your father comes home blind from the war, your childhood sweetheart is hit by a car right before the senior prom, your brother dies of spinal meningitis right before he's invited to try out for the New York Yankees. Yes, well, all you can do is play the cards they deal you, I said. Have you still got his glove? He said. No, I said. What kind of glove could I have told his mother about when we were both sozzled on sweet Rob Roy's in Manila 24 years ago? You carried it all the way through the war, but now it's gone? He said. He had to be talking about the non-existent baseball glove of my non-existent brother. Somebody stole it from me after I got home, I said. Thinking it was just another baseball glove, I'm sure. Whoever stole it had no idea how much it meant to me. He stood. I really must be going now. I stood too. I shook my head sadly. It isn't going to be as easy as you think to give up on the country of your birth. That's about as meaningful as my astrological sign, he said. What is? I said. The country of my birth, he said. You might be surprised, I said. Well, Dad, he said, it certainly won't be the first time. Can you tell me who in this valley might have gasoline? He said. I'll pay anything. Do you have enough gas to make it back to Rochester? I said. Yes, he said. Well, I said, head back the way you came. That's the only way you can get back, so you can't get lost. Right at the Rochester city limits, you will see the Meadowdale Cinema Complex. Behind that is a crematorium. Don't look for smoke. It's smokeless. A crematorium? He said. That's right, a crematorium, I said. You drive up to the crematorium and you ask for Guido. From what I hear, if you've got the money, he's got the gasoline. And chocolate bars, do you think? He said. I don't know, I said. Won't hurt to ask. 40. Not that there is any shortage of real child molesters, child shooters, child starvers, child bombers, child drowners, child whippers, child burners, and child defenestrators on this happy planet. Turn on the TV. By the luck of the draw, though, my son Rob Roy Fenstermaker does not happen to be one of them. Okay, my story is almost ended. And here is the news that knocked the wind out of me so recently. When I heard it from my lawyer, I actually said, oof. Hiroshi Matsumoto was dead by his own hand in his hometown of Hiroshima. But why would I care so much? He did it in the wee hours of the morning, Japanese time, of course, while sitting in his motor-driven wheelchair at the base of the monument marking the point of impact of the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima when we were little boys. He didn't use a gun or poison. He committed harakiri with a knife, disemboweling himself in a ritual of self-loathing once practiced by humiliated members of the ancient caste of professional soldiers, the samurai. And yet, so far as I am able to determine, he never shirked his duty, never stole anything, and never killed or wounded anyone. Still waters run deep. R.I.P. If there really is a big book somewhere in which all things are written, and which is to be read line by line, omitting nothing on Judgment Day, let it be recorded that I, when warden of this place, moved the convicted felons out of the tents on the quadrangle and into the surrounding buildings. They no longer had to excrete in buckets or, in the middle of the night, have their homes blown down. The buildings, except for this one, were divided into cement block cells intended for 2 men, but most holding 5. The war on drugs goes on. I caused 2 more fences to be erected, one within the other, enclosing the back of the inner buildings and with anti-personnel mines sewn in between. The machine gun nests were reinstalled in windows and doorways of the next ring of buildings, Norman Rockwell Hall, the Pahlavi Pavilion, and so on. It was during my administration that the troops here were federalized, a step I had recommended. That meant that they were no longer civilians in soldier suits. That meant that they were full-time soldiers, serving at the pleasure of the president. Nobody could say how much longer the war on drugs might last. Nobody could say when they could go home again. General Florio himself, accompanied by 6 MPs with clubs and sidearms, congratulated me on all I had done. He then took back the 2 stars he had loaned me and told me that I was under arrest for the crime of insurrection. I had come to like him, and I think he had come to like me. He was simply following orders. I asked him, as one comrade to another, "Does this make any sense to you? Why is this happening?" It is a question I have asked myself many times since, maybe 5 times today between coughing fits. His answer to it, the first answer I ever got to it, is probably the best answer I will ever get to it. "Some ambitious young prosecutor," he said, "thinks you'll make good TV." Hiroshi Matsumoto's suicide has hit me so hard, I think, because he was innocent of even the littlest misdemeanors. I doubt that he ever double-parked even, or ran a red light when nobody else was around. And yet he executed himself in a manner that the most terrible criminal who ever lived would not deserve. He had no feet anymore, which must have been depressing. But having no feet is no reason for a man to disembowel himself. It had to have been the atom bomb that was dropped on him during his formative years, and not the absence of feet, that made him feel that life was a crock of doo-doo. As I have said, he did not tell me that he had been atom bombed until we had known each other for 2 years or more. He might never have told me about it, in my opinion, if a documentary about the Japanese, Rape of Nanking, hadn't been shown on the prison TVs the day before. This was a program chosen at random from the public library. A guard who did the choosing couldn't read English well enough to know what the convicts would see next, so there was no censorship. The warden had a small TV monitor on his desk, and I knew he watched it from time to time, since he often remarked to me about the inanity of this or that old show, and especially I Love Lucy. The Rape of Nanking was just one more instance of soldiers slaughtering prisoners and unarmed civilians. But it became famous because it was among the first to be well photographed. There were evidently movie cameras everywhere, run by gosh knows whom, and the footage wasn't confiscated afterwards. I had seen some of the footage when I was a cadet, but not as a part of a well-edited documentary with a baritone voiceover and appropriate music underneath. The orgy of butchery followed a virtually unopposed attack by the Japanese army on the Chinese city of Nanking in 1937, long before this country became part of the finale rack. Hiroshi Matsumoto had just been born. Prisoners were tied to stakes and used for bayonet practice. Several people in a pit were buried alive. You could see their expressions as the dirt hit their faces. Their faces disappeared, but the dirt on top kept moving as though there were some sort of burrowing animal, a woodchuck maybe, making a home below. Unforgettable. How is that for racism? The documentary was a big hit in prison. Alton Darwin said to me, I remember, "If somebody's going to do it, I am going to watch it." This was 7 years before the prison break. I didn't know if Hiroshi had seen the show on his monitor or not. I wasn't about to ask. We were not pals. I was willing to be a pal, if that was part of the job. I believed he moved me in next door to him with the idea that it was time he had a pal. My guess is that he never had had a pal. No sooner had I become his neighbor, I think, than he decided he didn't want a pal after all. That didn't have anything to do with what I was or how I acted. To him, I think, a pal was like a piece of merchandise heavily promoted at Christmas, say. Why junk up his life with such a cumbersome contraption and all its accessories merely because it was advertised? So he went on hiking alone and boating alone and eating alone, which was okay with me. I had a rich social life across the lake. But the day after the documentary was shown, late in the afternoon, about supper time, I was rowing for shore in my fiberglass umiak, headed for the mud beach in front of our 2 houses in the ghost town. I had been fishing. I hadn't been to Scipio. My own 2 great pals over there, Mariel Peck and Damon Stern, were on vacation. They wouldn't be back until freshman orientation week, before the start of the fall semester. The warden was waiting for me on the beach, looking out at me in my crazy boat like a mother who had been worried to death about where her little boy had gone. Had I failed to keep a date with him? No. We had never had a date. My best supposition was that Margaret or Mildred had tried to burn one of our houses down. But he said to me as I disembarked, "There is something I think you should know about me." There was no pressing reason why I should know anything about him. We didn't work as a team up at the prison. He didn't care what or how I taught up there. "I was in Hiroshima when it was bombed," he said. I am sure there was an implied equation there. The bombing of Hiroshima was as unforgivable and as typically human as the rape of Nanking. So, I heard about his going into a ditch after a ball when he was a schoolboy, about his straightening up to find that nobody was alive but him, and on and on. When he was through with that story, he said to me, "I thought you should know." I said earlier that I had a sudden attack of psychosomatic hives when Rob Roy Fenstermaker told me that he had been busted for molesting children. That wasn't my first such attack. The first was when Hiroshi told me about being atom bombed. I suddenly itched all over, and scratching wouldn't help. And I said to Hiroshi what I would say to Rob Roy. "I thank you for sharing that with me." This was an expression, if I am not mistaken, which originated in California. I was tempted to show Hiroshi the protocols of the Elders of Tralfamadore. I'm glad I didn't. I might now be feeling a little bit responsible for his suicide. He might have left a note saying, "The Elders of Tralfamadore win again." Only I and the author of that story, if he is still alive, would have known what he meant by that. The most troubling part of his tale about the vaporization of all he knew and loved had to do with the edge of the area of the blast. There were all these people dying in agony, and he was only a little boy, remember. That must have been for him like walking down the Appian Way back in 71 BC, when 6,000 nobodies had just been crucified there. Some little kid, or maybe a lot of little kids, may have walked down that road back then. What could a little kid say on such an occasion? "Daddy, I think I have to go to the bathroom?" It so happens that my lawyer is on a first-name basis with our ambassador to Japan, former Senator Randolph Nakayama of California. They are of different generations, but my lawyer was a roommate of the senator's son at Reed College out in Portland, Oregon, the town where Tex bought his trusty rifle. My lawyer told me that both sets of the senator's racially Japanese grandparents, one set immigrants, the other set native Californians, were put into a concentration camp when this country got into the finale rack. The camp, incidentally, was only a few kilometers west of the Donner Pass, named in honor of white cannibals. The feeling back then was that anybody with Japanese genes inside our borders was probably less loyal to the United States Constitution than to Hirohito, the Emperor of Japan. The senator's father, however, served in an infantry battalion composed entirely of young Americans of Japanese extraction, which became our most decorated unit, taking part in the Italian campaign during, again, the finale rack. So, I asked my lawyer to find out from the ambassador if Hiroshi had left a note, and if there had been an autopsy performed to determine whether or not the deceased had ingested some foreign substance that might have made harakiri easier. I don't know whether to call this friendship or morbid curiosity. The answer came back that there was no note, and that there had been no autopsy, since the cause of death was so horribly obvious. There was this detail. A little girl who didn't know him was the first person of any age or sex to see what he had chosen to do to himself. She ran and told her mama. Back when we were neighbors, I asked the warden why he never left this valley, why he didn't get away from the prison and me and the ignorant young guards and the bells across the lake and all the rest of it. He had years of leave time he had never used. He said, "I would only meet more people." "You don't like any kind of people?" I said. We were talking in a sort of joshing mode, so I could ask him that. "I wish I had been born a bird instead," he said. "I wish we had all been born birds instead." He never killed anybody, and had the sex life of a calf kept alive for its veal alone. I have lived more vividly, and I promised to tell, at the end of this book, the number I would like engraved on my tombstone, a number that represents both my 100% legal military kills and my adulteries. If people hear of the number at the end and its double significance, some will turn to the end to learn the number in order to decide that it is too small or too big, or just about right, or whatever, without reading the book. But I have devised a lock to thwart them. I have concealed its oddly shaped key in a problem that only those who have read the whole book will have no trouble solving. So, take the year Eugene Debs died. Subtract the title of the science fiction movie based on the novel by Arthur C. Clarke, which I saw twice in Vietnam. Do not panic. This will give you a negative number, but Arabs in olden times taught us how to deal with such. Add the year of Hitler's birth. There, everything is nice and positive again. If you have done everything right so far, you should have the year in which Napoleon was banished to Elba and the metronome was invented. Neither event, however, discussed in this book. Add the gestation period of an opossum expressed in days. That isn't in the book either, so I make you a gift of it. The number is 12. That will bring you to the year in which Thomas Jefferson, the former slave owner, died, and James Fenimore Cooper published The Last of the Mohicans, which wasn't set in this valley, but might as well have been. Divide by the square root of 4. Subtract 100 times 9. Add the greatest number of children known to have come from the womb of just one woman, and there you are, by gosh. Question mark. Just because some of us can read and write and do a little math, that doesn't mean we deserve to conquer the universe. The end.